Don't think like the 95%. Don't talk like the 95%. Walk away, right? And join a group that is growing and striving, right? That is being champions at what they're doing. To get from the 95 to the 5, I had to change my thinking. I had to change my attitude. I had to change the people that I was around, right? Association, so important. Of all the things that I could teach you, right? Personal growth, development, leadership, time management, who to spend your time with, who not to spend your time with, association. I said all those things that I could share with you, all the books I could share with you. I said there's not one more important thing, more important thing in your life that I could ever share with you other than
Hey, it's Parker with UPBEAT. Thanks for listening in. We are joined by an awesome guest today. His name is Anthony Strickler. Anthony, how are you, man?
better than I deserve.
Hey, that's good to hear. Enjoying the Idaho weather right now. It's pretty nice today.
It's hard to believe that with such beautiful weather right now that we're going to have rain tomorrow.
I know, right? At least it's not in the same day. That's more Idaho fashion. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast, man. I've heard really amazing things about you. But for the people who are not familiar with who you are yet, for the listeners, if you don't mind just giving us a brief, introduction of who you are and what it is you're up to these days.
I consider myself to be a motivational teacher. It's been an incredible, life that I've had. God has been tremendous to me. I grew up where I was just a farm boy, parents of modest means. I didn't really have a lot of, great leadership in my life as I was growing up. And I always had this feeling that, I was meant to do something great with my life. And, I just had the challenges like most kids, changing schools, the way that I was raised, the community that I was raised in. Things were going pretty well till I was about 17. My parents split up and, things just got tough. I moved with my dad and I was still going to high school. I was working for my uncle as an apprentice electrician. And then I get a phone call from my second cousin of all people. I was actually getting ready to, go to a party. My friends and I at that time were throwing a major party. And I get this phone call and I look at it. I said, man, I haven't talked to him for a while. And so I took the phone call and he goes, you ever thought of starting a business? And right away that piqued my interest. And so I said, well, yeah, of course, but I'm a little busy. He goes, well, I've met this successful guy and he's easy to talk to. He's got a unique perspective of life and he's willing to teach us. You got to come meet this guy. And so I thought, man, all right. Looked at my phone, my watch. I got a few minutes. So I said, when do you want me to meet? And he told me where to meet and what time. And so I hustled down there. And about an hour later, I had started my first business. I was 18 years old. Like I said, I was, a few months into my adult life. And that's when good fortune came my way. How do you explain good fortune? It just happens, right? And this guy was successful and he was willing to teach us. And so it was at that point in my life that things began to change for me. I was hungry. I wanted to be successful, but I had no idea what I was doing. He told me one day, he said, Anthony, you got to buy a book. I said, no, I don't read. I'm not very good at reading. And he goes, no, you're going to buy a book. And I said, no. And so he convinced me to buy this book. I set it on the shelf for 6 months, didn't read it. And one day I remember showing up to a business meeting and one of the regional vice presidents of the company said, oh, hey, Anthony, something's different about you. You must have started reading. And I thought that was just so odd. But, as you begin to read and your perspective and your vocabulary and everything in your life begins to change, people notice. And so that's where I started. My first few months were not that memorable. I can remember I was about 3 months into my first business And the company, well, first of all, we were all traveling out to a business conference out in Dallas, Texas. And we had several, most of the people that were going with us were not, were broke, could barely make it. And so we decided we'd just caravan out there, and we took, I don't know, 6 or 7 15 passenger vans and a couple SUVs. And about 10:30 that night down in Barstow, California, we rolled our 15 passenger van. And the number one producer in my company, in my business at that time, was thrown out of the van and went through, months of in and out of the hospital and road rash from head to toe. It was an incredible experience.
Wow.
3 people were killed in that accident. Yeah. Everybody else in that, involved in the caravan, they all went back home. And there was probably 7 or 8 of us who decided, you know what, we can go back home and be around a bunch of people who are going to feel sorry for us and consult us and help us, and want the best for us, but it's going to be a negative situation. Or we can continue out to where we're going, where there's 10,000 people who are hearing about our story and are going to be there to support us. And Parker, I can't tell you the difference of how our lives turned out, of those 7 or 8 people that decided to continue on that day, and all of the rest of the people that went back home. It was a monumental decision for us at that point. I mean, I saw people that were doing well financially, making $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month, who just lost it. Like, some of them went back and started, smoking weed and drinking and fell out of the sky. It was incredible. 2 months after that, the company that we were using to service all of our customers, we were in energy and telecom at the time. That company, it was a small, about $350 million company at the time. And they filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and our money stopped. Our entire, incredible, financial experience that we had and worked so hard for, some of them for years, me just for a few months, it just disappeared. And some of us had to go back and get regular jobs. It was tough. God had been working on my heart, and he was calling me to come learn more about him. And it was during those years, that point, that I began to realize that I needed to know more about my creator. I needed to know more about all this information that I was getting from these business owners and these people in the, in the secular world. And so I went and found a teacher. I knew him when I was a kid. He worked for my grandfather at the time, and his wife managed all the apartment complexes that he owned. And we'd go over there with my dad or my grandfather, and he'd be like, "Hey man, what's going on? Hey, let me talk to you about Jesus." Right. And we're like, let's get out of here. Right. Let's split. Right. We didn't want to talk about that. We wanted to go. Right. But, at 20, 21 years old, I knew exactly who to talk to. And his name was Eddie Garcia. He was actually a former professional boxer. He was number 2 in the world. He fought undercard to Muhammad Ali. He fought over 29 times at the Olympic Auditorium in LA. And he was 73 when I went to talk to him that day. And from that day forward, we spent 3 years together. Started out 1 day a week, then to 2, then to 3, and sometimes 4 days a week. Unless he was sick or I was sick, we met every day, 2 to 3 hours a day, 3 to 4 days a week. And like, my whole life began to change. And so it was through that experience I began to teach other people. I was running an adult Bible study, and for about a year and a half, and then they introduced me to darts. They were all big dart players, and they always played down at this bar. And I thought, no, I'm not interested. Like, no, come down and check it out. Just see what we do. And so they convinced me. I went down there, and my wife today was running the bar at that time. And so I met my wife. 6 months later, I asked her to marry me. 7 months after that, we got married in September of 2012. And then in September, January 30th, right around my birthday, we left and moved our family to Idaho. Now, at the time, it was just her and I, but we left everybody we knew, all my teachers, all my mentors, all my circle of influence, my whole life. I spent 27 years there in Modesto, California, and we moved our entire lives to Idaho and started completely over. We knew nobody. We had no friends here. It was a huge move. I guess the rest is history. We've been here now 11 years. And this whole time I've been reading and growing and with the personal growth, the development. It's been an incredible ride. My first teacher, Mike, that I met back in April of 2004, he introduced me to my next teacher, Jim Rohn. Jim actually was from Southwest Idaho, right here where I live today. And I don't know if you've heard of Jim Rohn, but he was one of our, I guess they consider him to be one of America's foremost business philosophers, educators, teachers, traveled around the world and taught business development, personal growth, and leadership. He's written several books, but I've just stayed on that track, and I guess here I am today, right? Have the opportunity to meet some good people and take what I've learned and start teaching it to other people.
Awesome. I appreciate the breakdown, man. And it's hard to, when somebody asks you what your story is to pick like all the important highlights and stuff, but you did a really great job, explaining that to everyone. And I guess I would ask, in what you're doing now, like, what do you do for work now? Do you have businesses? And then where's your focus? Like, is it on making money? Is it on, kind of your own life, your family life, and how it, or is it on being a mentor to like other people now?
A few years after I moved here, I started a restoration company. I worked for a guy for, I don't know, about a year and a half. He owns a really successful company here in Idaho. Actually, he owns 5 or 6 companies today. But when I met him, he had a restoration and cleaning business. And eventually he wanted to just kind of get out of the cleaning and the hard surface division and just do mold remediation, fire, water, damaged, things like that. And so he said, hey, we're going to shut down the whole thing on the cleaning side, carpet cleaning, tile cleaning, all that kind of, stuff. And so I said, well, I wanted to continue at that point. So I just set up an LLC and I just started renting equipment from him and we worked out a deal. And so I did that for a few months and I just realized, that just wasn't for me. And so through several different things, I was a financial advisor for Northwestern Mutual for, a short period of time. I went to work for a software as a service company as an executive leadership and sales individual for them. Was there about 9 months and a couple of different companies tried to buy the company and both of them walked away. And so I said, hey, there's no future for me here. And I went back to what I had known for, a good portion of my life, which was excavation. And so to bring it kind of all back, and what I'm trying to do is, I took all of my money out of the fiat industry about 4 years ago, and I put it all into cryptocurrency. And so I've been studying and investing in cryptocurrency for 4.5 years extensively. I have had some great leaders in that department. We have a group that we, kind of all gather and throw ideas back and forth. And so primarily I work, I invest in the evenings and in my spare time. What I'm really trying to do with my life, Parker, if there was one message I had for people is if I could get people to walk away from the 95%, don't talk like they talk, don't act like they act, don't get excited about the things they get excited about, walk away from the 95% and join the 5% who have left mediocrity behind and are going for greatness. And that is what I want to do. I want to take everything that I have had poured into my life the two mentors that had the most amazing effect on my life, I guess I would say three, right? Mike, and then my Bible teacher, Eddie, was probably the most profound teacher of my life. And then Jim Rohn, I unfortunately, I never got to meet Jim Rohn. He died in 2009. But I spent a lot of time with him in the car, at the seminars, right? I have studied his work, read most of his books. You've probably heard a lot of people share their stories, podcasting and just in general, hearing people, meeting new people, and you hear their stories. And if you've ever spent any time listening to people share their stories, you develop a little bit of a listening ear. And almost always, if you talk to someone long enough, you'll hear someone else's name appear in their testimony. And, just as I've told my story, there's three men that popped up in my story, and I talk about those three men more than anybody else in my life because they've been the most influential men that have helped me shape my philosophy and how I look at life and what I do. And so if there is anything that I could do, if I could take what Jim and Mike and Eddie did for me and be that person to somebody else, that is what I want to do with my life. And I don't think that there's a greater gift that you could give any other person than your own personal growth and development.
Thanks so much for sharing. And, I feel like there's a lot in what you shared in your story and also in what you just shared that we could unpack. There's lots of different specific things to talk about, but where I'm kind of being led is, your story is one of like a lot of hard work too. Like you've done just an immense amount of work and a lot of like blue collar style work too. And I feel like on this podcast, especially, but just in the world today, we hear so much about kind of the, for lack of better words, fluffy side hustles, and work from home doing nothing kind of an idea. And so, or kind of a concept. So it's cool. It's cool to highlight the fact that you've done a lot of things and you've worked really hard, which just stands as an example to people who are listening. If they're doing a lot of things, if they're working really hard, like every single thing that they're doing is a linear path of progress, to becoming who they want to become. And so I think it's cool to point that out, but also, a story of mentorship. Your life was changed by mentors and you want to help other people, be a mentor for other people. And again, just standing as an example to other people listening to this podcast, if you're listening, who are your mentors? Who would you like to mentor? That really helps kind of shape what you're doing and give you clarity in life. So I just think it's cool to point those things out. I have do you have any thoughts on that? And then I've got another question for you.
My story is just like everyone else's, Parker. I had challenges. I was frustrated. I was confused. I didn't know what to do. I was working hard, but I kept getting knocked down. Right. And then this guy came into my life. And he started right away with me on, the set of the sail. And what I mean by that is, I used to have this long list of reasons of why my life wasn't working out, right? I would, I blame the government. I used to blame taxes. I used to blame the company and company policy. I used to blame my negative relatives. I used to blame the Democrats, right? I used to blame my parents, right? And my teacher, Jim, he said, Anthony, you've got a hell of a list going here. He said, there's one thing, there's one area that I have a problem with. And I said, oh boy, what's that? He said, well, you're not on the list. Boy, that was a slap in the face. But he said, Anthony, it's all those things that you're talking about, right? We call that the wind, right? And, in America, he's all, what you're doing is that, since we all have about the same wind blowing on us all, if you're blaming the wind, you're blaming all you've got. And he said, so it's not the wind that blows, but it's the set of the sail. right? And I said, okay, well, what does that mean, right? He said, well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to understand that you need to grow. And he started right away with me on personal growth and development. He said, Anthony, if you will change, everything will change for you. The set of the sail is like each person's own personal philosophy, right? And so you've got to start with understanding where you're at and where you need to go and the things that you need to learn. He says, if you'll just listen to what I'm saying and let me teach you, right? All those frustrations in your life will disappear. Don't think like the 95%. Don't talk like the 95%. Walk away, right? And join a group that is growing and striving, right? That is being champions at what they're doing. And it became very clear to me that at some point in my life, I realized that there was a large group of people that were busy, examining the roots of life. And then there was a small group of people that were busy picking the fruit. And I just had to realize that to get from the 95 to the 5, I had to change. I had to change my thinking. I had to change my attitude. I had to change the people that I was around, right? Association, so important.
I wanted to ask you, how faith has played a role in your life and in your success. And then another thing I wanted to mention too is, kind of a listener shout out here. You were referred to me by a guy I met at the barbershop a few weeks ago. You were referred to me by Jay, who listens to my podcast now, which I'm very grateful for him. So I wanted to shout him out and then, maybe explore how you and him have been able to help each other. But also that question of faith too.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably 6 months ago now, he came back to work for the company that I work for. And I noticed some of the things he was saying, right? And I started listening, and I thought, well, maybe this guy is, wants to learn, right? And if you pay attention and you listen, right, you'll hear people, their vocabulary sounds different, right? They'll say things like, I just don't want to be a deadbeat dad, right? And there's oftentimes something that comes into their life that changes it, right? He just had a kid, and so he's talking about how he doesn't want to just end up as a deadbeat, construction worker. I started to just talk to him, just share little bits and pieces, right? Don't think like that. You can't think like that. You don't want to do that. Don't worry about those kind of things. And eventually he started to kind of listen and pay attention. And so at some point I said, hey, here's a book, right? I gave him a book to read. And it was a book called The 5 Major Pieces to the Life Puzzle. And it talks about where do you start, right? Once you realize, hey, where do I need to grow? What do you work on, right? What do you go to work on, right? And Jim says, there's generally about a half dozen things that make up 90% of the difference of how your life turns out. And so all you've got to do to simplify it is keep searching for those half dozen things that make most of the difference, and then spend most of your time working on those half dozen things. And so the book explains it. So I gave him a book, said, hey, let's see what happens, right? So I just kind of didn't say anything for a couple of weeks, and eventually he read the book and started to have a bunch of questions. And a couple of days ago, on one of the jobs that we're working on, there's the superintendent of the job is, he's a little confused. He's sometimes he goes to, the LDS church, and sometimes on Saturdays he'll go to a Christian church. And we kind of got into a conversation, and, I've spent 3 years, very extensive, training. And, I know the word fairly well. Now, I'm an amateur at it, but I have a good understanding. And so he was sitting there listening to us have this conversation, and I was sharing different scriptures with him. And he didn't really say much. He was kind of interested, but he didn't really know what to say. And so a couple days later, I was having this conversation with him, and I just looked at him. I said, Jay, dude, there's of all the things that I could teach you, right? Personal growth, development, leadership, time management, who to spend your time with, who not to spend your time with, associations, and all those things that I could share with you, all the books I could share with you. I said, there's not one more important thing, more important thing in your life that I could ever share with you other than the gospel. And I said, look, probably the best quote that I ever got from my teacher, Eddie, was, he said that the greatest wisdom is loving God. And there's not a smarter thing, there's not a wiser thing that a man could do than to love God. And I know that's my personal faith. I don't know who's listening, but it's, Proverbs 10:9-10, it says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So what that means is, it just means that literally what dictates a wise man is a man who loves the Lord, right? One who fears the Lord, right? And it's the beginning of wisdom. Now it's the only beginning, but it's just the beginning. And then it says that knowledge of the Holy One, the more you know about God, your creator, the more you understand about life. And, that's a far greater message, deserving of, an entire podcast. But, if there's one thing I could, if there's one or two things I could share with anybody listening to this podcast is, ask for God's help and walk away from the average and the ordinary, right? And be a champion at what you're doing. And if you search, right? The ancient script says, if you will search, you will find. If you will knock, the door will be open. And eventually, if you put yourself in a position to grow and you start thinking like that, right? People will show up in your life. And I don't know how else to explain it, but good fortune, right? But that's where success lies, right? When preparedness and opportunity come together, and you just got to be ready. And if that's where you're at and you're searching and you're struggling and you're in the trenches, right? You've got 5 or 6, numbers dialed into the lock, and you just need one more to open it up for everything to flow for you. Just know that it's going to happen. You just can't quit. That's it, right? The difference between someone who makes $50,000 a year and someone who makes $500,000 a year is that winners do it. And they never quit. And they never give up. They don't give in to the naysayers, right? They go through all the no's, the disappointments, the setbacks, and they do it and do it and do it and do it until the job gets done, right? They care and a little bit more. They believe in the company and a little bit more. They take mentorship serious and a little bit more. They stay late and a little bit more. That's the key to success. I think it deserves that last part that I just shared, the just do it. And I can't, I haven't been able to confirm this, but in 1988, Nike took on a slogan called "Just Do It," and I think we've all seen it, right, for years, right? We've grown up with Nike, "Just Do It," right? But in 1987, there was a gentleman by the name of Art Williams who went from zero to, over $1 billion in insurance sales at that time. And in 1987, he shared about a 15 or 20 minute leadership topic. He was speaking to, a bunch of media and church organizations across the United States. And you can go look it up. It's the title of the title of his speech was "Just Do It." And so it would be unfair of me to not, at least give him the credit for, what he said, right? Winners do it. and they do it and do it and do it and do it and do it until the job gets done. And you never, ever, ever quit.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. And, I think people will tell listening in, the genuine place you're coming from, and like the power in your words and the words from people that you've learned from. And this has just been absolutely incredible. So I think it's a good note to end on, a good message to end on. It's kind of the reason I created UPBEAT. Actually, we'll close with this. The podcast is called UPBEAT, and kind of a reason that came to be was because I was in a place of struggle, of some serious depression, and not even wanting to be here anymore. And what UPBEAT meant to me was, turning a new page, choosing to be upbeat, choosing to stay, choosing to do that one more, right? That little bit more. And you never know what's around the corner. For me, the story goes, the second I made that choice, I had a video go viral and it changed my life forever. But in that day before, I wouldn't have known that there was going to be a video that goes viral that changes my life forever. So it's about showing up. It's about sticking to it. And I think an important message too is it's about putting yourself first in like personal development, but as a way of being able to show up better for other people and the impact you can have on other people. If you're doing those things, and if you put your love and trust in God, then it's just a matter of time and sticking to it.
That's it, never quit, right? And just understand that there's nothing more powerful than being somebody special to somebody else. And if you will go to work on yourself, everything will change for you. And I 100% agree. I know it's a personal message, ask for God's help, right? Because we all need God's help. And, that as the message that I share with people, we've all heard the story of the guy, and it's real short. I'll just share this in closing. We've all heard the story of the man who bought a piece of land on the edge of town, and for all practical purposes, it was a rock pile. But a few years later, he turned that land into a beautiful garden, such an incredible garden. It was so beautiful and immaculate that people began to hear about this garden, and they began to travel from all over the place to take a tour and get an opportunity to see this amazing garden that this man had put together. And so one day he was giving a tour of the garden, and there was a guy taking the tour, and he thought to himself, he said, this guy shouldn't get all the credit. And so after the tour was over and he got a chance to talk to the gardener, he said, you and the good Lord here have a beautiful garden. And the gardener, he thought to himself for a moment, and he said, I get your point. Right? If it wasn't for the seed and the soil and the sunshine and the rain and the miracle of the seasons, there would be no garden. But he said, you should have seen this place a few years ago when God had it all to himself. And, I think the moral of that story is that we all have a part to play. And so, guys like you and me, we're pleading with you, right? We're pleading with the audience, right? Anyone who will listen, right? That go out there and grow and become the person that you need to become so that you can make a contribution and you can play your part, right? The good news is that God has the tough end of the deal, right? He has to figure out how to grow the tree, but he left one simple task for you and me, and that is to plant. And if you'll go out there and you'll grow as a person, and you put yourself in a position to be somebody special to somebody else, you can make this place that we live in a much better place.
Absolutely love it. Hey, thanks so much for being on Upbeat, Anthony, and I'm excited to get this one out and shared with you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was an incredible experience. I hope that I said what I said well.
You did, definitely. Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a good one.
You too, brother. Thanks.